Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about Russian politics. Russia has a general election coming up on the 15th of March, and the most credible candidate that wanted to stand against President Putin was an individual called Alexei Navalny.
Russia's prison service reported the death on Friday of opposition leader Alexei Navalny, last seen here a day before appearing by video link from the penal colony north of the Arctic Circle.
47-year-old Alexei Navalny was looking healthy, joking with a judge via video link from his Arctic prison just yesterday. Navalny's mother saw him Monday and said he was in good spirits. Yet somehow Alexei Navalny, Russian President Vladimir Putin's fiercest and most energetic critic, dropped dead suddenly at a penal colony in Siberia. Prison officials say Navalny went for a walk but felt unwell and quickly lost consciousness. They said medics could not revive him. President Biden blamed President Putin.
Make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death.
Now, as you've just seen from that footage, Alexei Navalny was actually being held in prison, so was unlikely to be able to stand against President Putin in the upcoming election anyway. But in today's video, I want to start off by talking about Alexei Navalny. We'll have a look at how he rose to prominence in opposition against President Putin, why he ended up in prison and how he died. We'll then talk about what the reaction has been all around the world because, as you've seen from the start of today's video, President Biden has come out and unequivocally said that he is blaming President Putin for his death. We'll then talk about what other people have said. We'll look at the protests that are now starting up around Russia. And then finally today, I'll wrap up with my summary as to what I think this means for the general election, what the likely outcome is, and what that means with regards to the war in Ukraine. But before we get started on all of that, once again, I'd like to say thank you so much to everybody that's supporting the channel. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks or signed up as a patron or a member, thank you so much. It really helps to keep the channel going, so I really appreciate it.
He went from being Vladimir Putin's staunchest critic to leading Russia's strongest anti-corruption movement and eventually Russia's most prominent political prisoner. The son of a military officer, Alexei Navalny was born in the village of Butin, outside of Moscow. In the late 1990s, he earned a law degree from Moscow's Friendship of the People's University.
Navalny started out as an anti-corruption blogger, exposing on his YouTube show the lavish lifestyles enjoyed by Putin and his inner circle. Navalny was a central figure in massive protests against Putin
and grew into Russia's most well-known political opposition figure, crusading against corruption. He called Putin's United Russia Party, quote, the party of crooks and thieves. He led mass protests in 2011 and again in 2012 when it was clear President Putin would regain the presidency. In 2013, he broke into politics with a mayoral run in Moscow, and though he didn't win, he did beat the incumbent Putin-backed mayor. House arrest followed in 2014 for embezzlement and later convictions on fraud and money laundering, charges Navalny denied. Despite being barred from running, in 2016 he announced he would run against Putin for the presidency in 2018. Despite repeated threats, Navalny forged on with his anti-corruption foundation, investigating Russia's elite and bypassing state-run media with YouTube videos garnering millions of views.
This is our country, and these swindlers are stealing our money. Everyone should fight however he can.
A 2017 detention for an unsanctioned rally, one of the country's largest opposition demonstrations in years. 187 cities, tens of thousands of Russians, all protesting corruption. His fight nearly killed him once already. In 2020, Navalny was in a coma for 2 weeks after being poisoned by a lethal nerve agent. Russia denied poisoning him, but a recorded call to a Russian intelligence agent featured in this 2022 CNN documentary revealed the poison was planted in his underpants. Despite being evacuated to Germany for treatment, Navalny made the decision to return to Russia in 2021. He was jailed as soon as he landed in Moscow and has been behind bars ever since. Russian prison authorities today announced Alexei Navalny died in a penal colony in the Arctic Circle, where he was serving a 19-year sentence on extremism charges widely seen as politically motivated.
A prison service statement described how Navalny felt unwell after taking a walk at the facility in Karp, about 1,200 miles northeast of Moscow. It added the 47-year-old lost consciousness almost immediately and was unable to be revived by prison medical staff. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov told reporters the cause of death was being established. On arrival at the prison where her son died, Alexei Navalny's mother was told he was struck down with sudden death syndrome. That's according to his team, who added the 69-year-old Ludmila was also told the family wouldn't receive his body until an investigation was completed. Navalny's mother was given the official death notice at the prison in Karp on Saturday and told his body had been moved to Salikard for an investigation, although the morgue in the town told Reuters it had not yet arrived. Navalny spokeswoman Kira Yarmish.
So right now we don't have access to the body and we don't know for sure where it is. And we demand that Russian authorities immediately give Alexei's body to his family.
You know, like millions of people around the world, I'm literally both not surprised and outraged by the news. Reported death of Alexei Navalny. He bravely stood up to the corruption, the violence, and all the bad things that the Putin government was doing. In response, Putin had him poisoned. He had him arrested, he had him prosecuted for fabricated crimes, he sentenced him to prison, he was held in isolation. Even all that didn't stop him from calling out Putin's lies. Even in prison, he was a powerful voice for the truth. Reports of his death, if they're true, and I have no reason to believe they're not, Russian authorities are going to tell their own story. But make no mistake, Putin is responsible for Navalny's death. Putin is responsible. What has happened to Navalny is yet more proof of Putin's brutality. We don't know exactly what happened, but there is no doubt that the death of Navalny was the consequence of something that Putin and his thugs did.
It's pretty obvious that Alexei Navalny did not die, but he was brutally killed by Kremlin's regime. And I think in such a way, Kremlin's regime is sending the signal to Russian society, intimidating the society and trying to show that, look, if you will oppose us, you will take the same fate or the same consequences.
First of all, just reflecting overnight just makes you think what an incredibly brave man this was. You know, his life revealed so much about the true nature of Putin's ghastly regime, and his death has revealed that all over again, what we're actually dealing with. There should be consequences when appalling human rights outrages like this take place. What we do is we look at whether there are individual people that are responsible and whether there are individual measures and actions that we can take. We don't announce them in advance, so I can't say any more than that. But that's what we'll be looking at. Of course, we've already summoned the ambassador and we've made clear our views about this dreadful event and the way this person was treated. And of course, being here in Munich means that I'm going to be meeting with G7 colleagues, other foreign ministers, and we'll have the discussions with them. I'm clear we'll be taking action, and I would urge others to do the same.
His wife, Yulia Navalnaya, took the stage at Munich's security conference hours after he was reported dead.
We cannot believe Putin and Putin's government. They always lie. But if this is true, I want Putin and his entire entourage to know that they will bear responsibility for what they have done with our country, with my family, and with my husband. And this day will come very soon.
Everyone should understand that it is Vladimir Putin who personally ordered to kill Alexei Navalny. He has to take responsibility for that.
The Kremlin is calling Western accusations unacceptable and says it doesn't yet know how Navalny died. But critics point out that many of Putin's opponents have died just like this, mysteriously, either falling out of windows or poisoned, or, in this case, dropping dead in jail.
Today, hundreds gathered across European cities chanting anti-Putin slogans and blaming him for Navalny's death.
Moscow supporters laid flowers to honor Navalny, despite a warning from the state prosecutor that protests would not be allowed. When a woman tried to unfurl a sign, she was taken away by authorities.
Hundreds of people have been arrested across Russia at meetings and memorials to Navalny. Police stopped flowers being laid at a memorial of victims of political repression near the Urals city of Yekaterinburg. And in Moscow, hundreds of flowers and candles laid on Friday in the opposition leader's memory were removed by Saturday. It didn't stop more continuing to arrive.
So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's going on with regards to the Russian general election that's coming up in March is really interesting. Now, the most credible candidate that could have stood against President Putin was Alexei Navalny. And as we've seen in today's video, over the last 15 years or so, he rose to prominence, firstly identifying corruption that was going on at the upper echelons of the Russian political system. He believed that all of the people at the top were creaming off lots of money at the detriment of the Russian people. And following on from all of those accusations, he then decided that he wanted to enter politics. At first, he tried to stand as the mayor of Moscow. He didn't get voted in that position. And in 2018, he wanted to run against President Putin. Now, he wasn't allowed to do that because he was charged of various things, and also he was attacked on a number of occasions where he almost died. And he ended up in Germany in exile. But in 2020, he decided to come back to Russia, was immediately arrested, and then has been in prison ever since that time. And so even though he wanted to stand against President Putin, he wasn't actually allowed because he was in prison. Now, the news that he has now died in prison 1 month before the election is due to take place from what's called sudden death syndrome, which is basically where somebody has a cardiac arrest, so their heart stops beating, so no blood is pumping around your body, therefore no oxygen is, and you die immediately. And the reason this wasn't just referred to as a cardiac arrest is that Alexei Navalny was never diagnosed with any form of heart disease, so this was a complete surprise. Now, when I've looked into these statistics, around 0.3% of the population die from sudden death syndrome every year. So it does happen. It can actually happen to anybody in the world. But 0.3% is obviously a very slim chance. It's quite a rare occurrence. And as we've heard in today's video, a lot of people around the globe don't believe that Alexei Navalny died from sudden death syndrome. Joe Biden is convinced that President Putin was behind this death. And we've heard from a number of other leaders that they believe that President Putin had some involvement as well. So there's a lot of shade being thrown against President Putin right now. And this is an interesting time for him to die just before the election. He wasn't going to be allowed to stand anyway because he's in prison. And if you're in prison, you can't stand to be president of Russia. So he wasn't a genuine candidate to really challenge President Putin. But what he could have done is made a lot of noise, made it uncomfortable for the authorities. He may well have come out and started saying that he didn't believe that this was going to be a fair election. And if you've been following the channel, you'll know that I posted a video previously talking about a female candidate that wanted to stand against President Putin. And one of her doctrines was that she wanted to stop the war in Ukraine immediately. If she was voted in, she was going to withdraw from Ukraine. However, she was subsequently banned from standing in that election also. So if you take a step back and look at the bigger picture here, it doesn't look like the candidates who want to stand against President Putin are being allowed to do so. Now, there are some people who are standing in opposition because this is an election, and obviously if you only have one candidate, there isn't really anything to vote for. So you do have to have some alternative choices. But I think it's extremely unlikely that anybody else apart from President Putin is likely to win the forthcoming general election in Russia. And what that means is that we're going to have another 5-year period of his control. And that means, I think, bad news in terms of the war in Ukraine, because President Putin has made it very clear what his position is. If you saw the video that I posted recently where we were looking at the interview that he gave to Tucker Carlson, he was very clear that Russia is not going to withdraw, that he believes that Russia is invincible in terms of its position in Ukraine, and that he only sees a resolution coming around if everybody wants to come around the table and agree with Russia's position. So I think for the medium term, it's extremely likely that President Putin will stay in power. It's therefore extremely likely that Russia will continue their war in Ukraine. And that could last for another 3 or 4 or 5 or even more years. I've talked about this before, but when Russia invaded Chechnya in the 1990s, that war lasted for 9 years. And of course, the economic impact of this war is negative. It's having a negative impact on Russia's economy because of all of the sanctions that have been applied against Russia. And if you follow the channel, you'll know that we've talked about all of the negative implications in terms of oil and gas and rubles and everything else relating to the financial system in Russia. But it's also having a negative impact on other economies because everybody's now having to change their supply chains. The West is now having to buy things like liquefied natural gas, which is more expensive. They're having to pay for infrastructure to get that liquefied natural gas to feed into their gas networks. And so overall, the war in Ukraine is bad news for the global economy. And when you look at the facts that the UK and Japan and Germany are now in recession, inflation is still remaining stubbornly high in a lot of economies. We've got high interest rates, which are having a negative impact on both businesses and consumers because it's increased the cost of borrowing. All of this is bad news. And so if the war in Ukraine does continue for another few years, it's likely to have a continuing negative impact on the global economy, and that's obviously bad news for everybody. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video, you found it useful, informative and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for watching this video all the way through to the end, and here's something to put a smile on your face.